What's up, YouTube? BigSweetC here with you. Got a special little video for you today. We are less than a week away from the Final Fantasy VII Remake release on April 10th. Today is the 4th, I believe, is when I'm releasing this video. Saturday, April 4th, so we're 6 days away. And I can't wait. I fully plan on getting it downloaded as soon as I can. I'm assuming there's going to be some sort of like pre-download that you can do it. I know there's been a whole bunch of BS going back and forth because retailers that weren't supposed to get it in time because of COVID-19 now all of a sudden got it early and decided to start selling it, and so people have already been streaming it, which I think is total BS because you're not supposed to be streaming anything before the game is released. Not in a sense of a content creator level, but on a personal level, as a consumer. I get the idea of letting people have the game early so they can play it for a little bit, write their review, and then you can decide as a consumer whether you want to make the purchase or not. But I mean, that's totally different than other people being able to literally play the game before everybody else does, and you know, and I think that's kind of shitey. You know, but that is not what this video is about. Although I did want to bring your attention to it in case you accidentally run across somebody that's saying that they have a Final Fantasy VII Remake stream early, or there's like a Let's Play or a walkthrough on YouTube or something, and you're kind of unsure about it. The game has been released in Australia that I know of, because they were supposed to get it super late. Square Enix was already apologizing for it being shipped late and all this stuff because of the coronavirus, and turns out they ended up getting it early. Shipments went just as scheduled. They got it early, and instead of doing the right thing and just not giving it out, they decided to start selling it early for whatever reason. Now, if you got it shipped directly to your home, that's one thing. But you know, I know retailers. Personally, working at Best Buy, I can't believe they're allowed to do that. I know we would get fined and sued and possibly shut down for even doing a day early, let alone a little over a week. So that's kind of strange. But hey, nonetheless, that's not what this is about. I went back and replayed the original Final Fantasy VII on PlayStation 1. Technically it was on PS3, but it was the PS1 version downloaded on my PS3. But I wanted to go back and kind of see if I could, you know, go back, and I see all these guys talking about, you know, what made it great to them, and I see all these like new Let's Plays, and we're going through Midgar, and we're doing all this stuff stream. So I kind of wanted to kind of do the same thing, and so I went back to replay it, and I was going to do this whole thing with it, but the truth is, it's kind of it is still my favorite game, but it's just kind of a, you know, a different era on my life. So I'm gonna do this kind of what I liked about it video instead, kind of a reminisce, if you will, because going back and playing it now was an incredibly different experience than what I'm sure I experienced back in 1997 when it came out. Again, it came out in 1997. I was probably a freshman in high school, at absolute latest a sophomore. I graduated in 2000, so my freshman year was 96, 97. I believe this came out in like February of 1997. So I think it would have been my freshman year going into the summer before my sophomore. And I just really remember how excited I was when this game came out. We had heard about it for a long time, and you know, I just remember being like super excited when this came out because I had been a huge Final Fantasy fan from Nintendo to Super Nintendo, and they were originally planning on putting this one out on the new generation, the next gen console Nintendo, because it was going to be CD-ROM based, and Squaresoft at the time, Square, really liked the idea of being able to do these kind of real life action sequences, and they did it. They were, you know, they're like the first game ever to do these kind of crazy cinematic I think they're called FMVs. I want to say it sounds like it should stand for full music video, but I know full motion video, I guess, is what it stands for. But you have these cinematic cutscenes now for the first time ever, and that was a Final Fantasy VII thing. The whole reason I went with Sony PlayStation is because of this game. Nintendo and Square were working on the next gen console, and then it turns out that Nintendo wasn't ready to make the jump into the next generation of graphics, so they jumped ship, and Nintendo continued on with the N64, and so Square went over to Sony and started working with them on the PlayStation 1 console. And like the whole reason I even bought a PlayStation 1 was because of this game. My brother and I had played it, and there was like a demo out for it. You could even tell that Sony like could see that this was like a game that could not only be a viable moneymaker in the game itself, but as a console launch, so you started getting this demo with every console that you bought. Sony basically threw the kitchen at Square and was like, hey, if you launch on our platform, we'll give you all these ridiculous copyright money for putting that on our platform, because they really knew that it could solidify them as a console contender, and it did. They came in, and I'm not going to attribute all of Sony's success to Final Fantasy VII. Obviously, they still have the God of War franchise, and a bunch of other exclusives that could have easily kind of put them in contention. But Final Fantasy VII was the first one that really cemented them as an option for home consoles. And you can tell that people have kind of stuck with it through the years, because I was looking at a top 15 console selling list a few days ago, and like every single one of the PlayStation consoles has beaten out every single one of the Xbox consoles, and that's just crazy to me. And now I know that it seems that, like, well, it kind of makes sense. Sony is a worldwide recognized company. Microsoft is kind of US based, but that's not necessarily the truth anymore. Microsoft is worldwide, just as Sony is. And if it was only because of the worldwide base and everything, you would think that maybe one of the really good selling Microsoft Xboxes would have overtaken one of the worst PlayStation boxes, and it hasn't. So, like, PlayStation, I think, owes a lot to Square Enix, specifically Squaresoft, for that aspect. Final Fantasy VII coming out and being such a gigantic success. I mean, it blew up, and I know there were people that I would never expect to play video games, let alone RPGs, that were playing this game. And so, like, I try to go back and kind of think of, like, what it was about the game, and replaying it seems weird, because again, what I enjoyed about it this time is probably not what I was thinking about last time. When I was in high school, I Rage Against the Machine was not a band that I had, like, listened to. I wasn't all gung-ho about figuring out what's going on in the world society today, like climate change and stuff like that, corporations and their influence on society and the environment and stuff like that. And they're just these gigantic themes in Final Fantasy VII that I would have never thought of, that I would have never looked at it in that aspect of a game had I not gone back and played it now. Because, I mean, you literally kick the game off, you're this mercenary, you don't even know your name, you're this mercenary who's been hired by a rebel group to infiltrate a corporation's power reactor and blow it up. The Mako reactor. We don't really know what Mako is. They kind of explain it as you go along, but it's the planet's life stream for everybody. I mean, spoiler alert, we all know what it is, but during this time when you first start playing the game, you have no idea what this Mako reactor is. You just know you've been hired to blow this reactor up by a rebel group. you know, and then they kind of get into this whole idea of how the reason we're blowing up this reactor is because the corporation, the Shinra Corporation, is going around and pulling all this Mako out of the Earth, which is destroying the environment and the Earth, and it's gonna make the planet uninhabitable for the future human race, you know. And like this is back in 1997, you know. This is even before like Al Gore and his Inconvenient Truth came out, and everybody loved Leonardo DiCaprio as the voiceover in it. You know, like this is way beyond the climate crisis timeline. You know, way before. And here you are, you're involved in this, but it turns out that, you know, you're this Cloud character who, to be honest with you, doesn't really care about the environment. He's only there for money. So. And then it turns out, you know, one thing happens to another. You find out that his childhood friend Tifa is the reason he's, you know, being involved. He was even brought into this Avalanche group in the first place. And because of your relationship with her, you decide to go on another adventure. And then that second, you know, Mako reactor sabotage plan turns into a whole thing where you're going after what used to be your, like, the role model of the world, the superhero for everybody, Sephiroth, who ends up turning into this crazy psychotic bad guy. But that's, you know, but it even devolves into bigger than that, because you go after this guy only to find out that he's somehow mentally connected to you. You end up giving him this super powerful item, you know, the black materia, and he calls in doom to the planet. And so you have this rebel against the corporation status going on, and then you have this battle for the planet, you know, this climate crisis kind of, and I want to call it climate crisis because it's not that. It's, you know, corporations sucking the lifeblood out of the planet, oligarchy, if you will, which the Japanese do so much better than the Americans in terms of how they portray different types of societies. You know, Japan kind of looks at it from the outside. America, we have to keep reminding everybody that even though we are an oligarchy, we pretend to be a free market when we're not. So there's the varying ideologies that are conflicting, so you get a much better viewpoint of it from the Japanese side of things than you do from the American side of things. Even in games such as like Fallout, you know, I mean, you realize what happened, but it's really, you know, it's really not deciphered between, you know, who it was that was the root cause. You know, somebody had to fire first. You know, and I think they say that it's the Chinese, so they kind of bail out. You know, the Fallout world kind of bails out the American people in that aspect, whereas the Japanese kind of look at it from the outside, and you don't really have that biased viewpoint, if you will, if that kind of makes any sense. And then you turn into this redemption story. You know, you have Cloud, you have your main character whose only job is to get paid, and then protect Aerith, and then find Sephiroth, and then save the planet. And he ends up being the reason that the planet is in such a crisis. You know, like he's being mentally manipulated by the bad guy. You find out that he's connected through all these experiments because of his former affiliation with the Shinra Corporation as a quote-unquote soldier first class, even though we know he wasn't actually a soldier first class. We get into that later. Like, it's just this giant story with all these sorts of like turns and twists, and this like Memento meets Inception meets Fight Club type style that's all my jam right now. You know, like ever since having gone to probably film school would be the beginning of it, the opening to the idea of this like existentialism. You know what I mean? This everything connects, but everything's disconnected, but it all connects type of thing. And it's there's all these convoluted timelines, and this happens then, that happens there, all this kind of stuff. You have this history that you think is correct. Turns out it's a complete fabrication made up in your mind because Cloud suffers from PTSD and being subjected to these new soldier techniques that the government, I should say the government, the Shinra Corporation has been developing for their soldiers. And it speaks on all these levels that were so ahead of its time. That is crazy that is not generally talked about more than this. But I mean, you have your main hero, your main character is Cloud, right? He suffers from PTSD. He's been subjugated to possibly immoral and unethical testing by a corporation that hires mercenaries that are then used to protect, used by the state to protect corporate interests. You know, you have this way before its time. What are we doing, you know, with these corporate interests that are digging up all this life matter out of the planet? You know, what really is it doing to the planet itself and to the future of the people itself? You know, I know we're getting short-term profits, but what are the long-term effects that it's going on? You have stories of redemption, you know, and that's not even to get into the whole theory about how the main character is not really the main character. You know, you get into probably the most mind-bending kind of unbelievable moment in video game history. The main character is not necessarily the main character, the hero of the story. The hero of the story is really Aerith, you know, who knows who she is, but you know, doesn't really know how to fully appeal to her potential, if that makes any sense. And so she clings onto Cloud and his movement to find Sephiroth to not only you know, learn more about herself, but learn more in the ways of where she fits in to the whole thing. And then she realizes what she has to do, so she runs off to do it by herself, knowing that there's a good chance that she's running off to sacrifice. Now, that is nothing new in the franchise, but what happens, and if you haven't played the game and for whatever reason you've been living under a rock and you don't know, I'm going to give you a spoiler warning right now. In the middle of the game, the main character, the hero, the one who actually fulfills the life, planet-saving moment, doesn't sacrifice herself. She is murdered by the enemy. Murdered. And then all of a sudden her theme song hits. Or however it goes. And it's just the most incredibly heart-wrenching moment that I can remember in any video game I've ever played. And that's including The Walking Dead, that's including The Last of Us. You have this girl who all she wants to do is save the planet, and she goes to do what she can, and instead of sacrificing herself like we've seen in so many tropes, she's brutally murdered before our eyes as we try and get to her to save her. And her theme song kicks in, and you have to go through this crazy battle scene, this crazy boss fight with her music playing in the background, and it's just this unbelievably somber, sad, revenge-filled moment. And it's, I mean, it's unlike anything that I've ever experienced in a video game before. And to be honest with you, this is actually probably what I'm most excited to see when they get to it in the remake part of it. And it just, I mean, just a great moment. And then on top of that, after you go through all of this, you have incredible boss fights, and then even after the game, you have all these bonus things. You have ruby weapon, you have emerald weapon, you have these super powerful extra bosses that you don't have to kill if you don't want to, but they're there for the pure enjoyment of doing so. You have these secret materia that are these unbelievably powerful materia that you can only get to by making golden chocobos, which you can only do by winning chocobo races and stuff like that. There's all these side games that you can do. There's 2 characters that you can or cannot get if you want. Like they're very viable very easy to miss if you've never played it before. But they add to the story. You know, of the history of the Shinra Corporation, the history of Soldier and the Turks, and all these different factions in the game, and there's just so much replay value because of that. And I mean, it's just one of those games where you could tell it was one of those moments where they really hit the nail on the head. You know, I mean, it's hard to get that in a game nowadays because it seems like everything's either getting delayed because of bugs, or they're releasing it before they fix the bugs and they're just having everybody beta test it out for them and everything. But here's a game that when it came out, it was about as perfect as it could be. And I mean, even so much as it was awarded all these Game of the Year awards, people were talking about it being the greatest game ever made and all this stuff, and it still holds the test of time, and it will probably forever be my favorite game. I mean, obviously, right now the hype from the remake is putting it up there. You know, it's artificially inflating it a little bit, but it will, even without the remake, probably be the one game that I will always say is my favorite game of all time. And I highly encourage, if you get a chance, to go back and play it, because it's great, even now. If you're a fan of the old traditional JRPGs, it's a fantastic game, and it deserves its recognition. But this was a little bit longer than I wanted it to be, so before I keep rambling on, I'm gonna wrap this one up. Do yourself a favor, check it out, and then do yourself a favor if you're excited for the remake like I am. Hit that sub button, hit that notification bell. We're gonna have plenty of videos on it, and then if you want the live streams, head on over to Twitch and hit that follow button and the notification bell over there, because I will be streaming it probably a lot. Finally, last thing, Patreon guys, I'm going to do a little special thing for you with this game as well. So if you haven't become a Patreon member yet, do that as well. Links down in the description box below. Either way, that's going to do it for this one. BigSweetC, that's me, wishing YouTube that's you. Wonderful day, night, morning, afternoon, evening, whatever time of day it might be. As long as you're watching, I'm wishing you a wonderful watching time. Sweetness, signing off. Peace.